Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Wills, Women, and Wealth podcast, where we lead you holistically from overwhelmed to empowered through estate planning. I am Elsa W. Smith, your Maryland estate planning attorney and the host of Wills, Women, and Wealth. This is a podcast for women who value their health, wealth, and the legacies that they are creating. Each episode will bring you interviews in the areas of finance, law, mental, physical health, and so much more. I'll also share educational episodes that answer your questions on wills, estate, and probate topics. This is a community, so I want you to engage. Do you have a question or a topic you'd like us to feature on the podcast? If so, contact us via social media or leave a comment. At the end of the podcast, please support us by leaving a 5-star review. That will help this podcast reach even more people. This and all future episodes will be available on YouTube, Spotify, Google Podcasts, and Apple Podcasts. Now on with the show. Maternal and infant health in the United States have been plagued by racial inequalities for many years. This is evident in the fact that Black women giving birth are 3 times more likely to die during and after childbirth compared to their white counterparts. And Black infants are twice as likely to die. This broken system is caused in part by racism, systemic medical prejudice, and discrimination. To address these socioeconomic disparities and promote healthy and successful pregnancies among Black women, they need to learn how to advocate for themselves before, during, and after childbirth. Today on the podcast, we have an expert who owns a law firm dedicated to advocating on behalf of victims of birth injuries. She will also share how we can become proactive instead of reactive, and how a birth injury attorney can be a valuable member of your team as an expectant mom. Now, let me tell you a little bit about my guest. Her name is attorney Renee Boston. Renee Boston is an attorney with nearly 20 years of experience. She was born in Washington, D.C., and raised in Metro Atlanta. She is a founding partner of Boston Law, LLC. She concentrates her practice in medical malpractice and negligence. She's tried numerous cases, both in front of a judge and jury. Not being a stranger to the courtroom, Renee is a passionate trial attorney and an active member of several groups exclusive to trial attorneys. The area of medical malpractice, this area, I should say, of medical malpractice hits home for Renee. Her father passed away during a hospital stay, doing a routine outpatient procedure. And since then, she has vowed to help her clients learn what happened to them or their loved ones. Birth injury litigation is a special subset of medical malpractice law. It focuses on the negligent management of labor and the subsequent injuries suffered by the infant. This area is Renee's passion. She tirelessly advocates for those who are unable to advocate for themselves. A traumatic injury can have devastating effects on the victim and the victim's family, and Renee understands the importance of having someone on your side that has been where you are. It is my honor and pleasure to welcome Renee Boston to the Wills, Women, and Wealth podcast. Welcome, Renee.
Thank you, Elsa. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm glad to be here.
Well, it's a pleasure. It's a pleasure to have you. First of all, before we get started, you and I are both attorneys, so disclaimers are part of our part of the way we do business. So let me just say to the audience, you're not a physician, but you are an attorney who specializes in representing victims of traumatic birth injuries, medical malpractice, and medical negligence. So let me just put that out there, because we are going to be talking about specific medical jargon, legal, and medical terminology. And we just want to make clear, unless you became a doctor within the last few months, I didn't know it. But no, you and your firm are well known in this area for medical malpractice and medical negligence. So it really is a joy. And I'm excited to have you on the program. Why is this area of law so important to you?
For me, I know a lot of people probably heard about the disparaging treatment that a lot of, especially minority mothers and Black women and Black mothers as well, but the Black maternal mortality rates, as well as Black infant mortality rates and infant injuries, has just skyrocketed over the last 15, 20 years or so. And it's kind of hard to believe that in a country like the United States, we pride ourselves on being, number one in everything. But our numbers for Black mothers and Black children kind of mirror that of, third world countries. And it's really hard to be a part of a system because, technically we all are kind of part of the system, but it's hard to be a part of it, see it happening, and not doing anything about it. So that's why my partner Marcus and I, we when we started our firm and we started trying to navigate toward from the traditional medical malpractice toward more birth injury cases, we set out with the goal of not being just about coming in after the injury's already occurred, after the mother's already getting birth, but we want to advocate and educate at the beginning, as soon as possible, so that when you're in a situation where you're approaching labor and delivery, or you're in the baby's already been born and you hear some of this terminology, you're in the loop. You know what's going on, and it's not. You don't have to be blindsided if we can help it. So our goal with our firm is to educate, and so that is the biggest part of what we do. And I think that is what kind of motivates us to help and do what we can, do our part, so that the Black maternal health numbers kind of subside. The numbers got to go down. It's ridiculous what they are.
It really is. And the articles that I've come across are just, you're just shocked over and over again. It's like, how can this be happening here?
Right.
And I couldn't agree with you more. Now, before we really do a deep dive into what we're going to talk about today, I think it would help the audience to clear up or to clarify some basic terms that with which we should all be familiar, like geriatric pregnancy, a doula, what's a midwife. Could you shed some light on those terms, please?
Okay, so I'll start off with doula and midwife.
Okay.
A doula is usually someone who's maybe it's more holistic in nature. They may not have received any medical training at all, but they're more so there to relax the mother, comfort the mother, and get her focused on the process itself. Because the doula is not medically trained, he or she is just usually there to assist the mother with the breathing exercises that she's already learned, and just to help in that kind of way. Midwives, there's subcategories within the midwifery. There's a general midwife and there's a certified midwife. Certified nurse midwives are nurses and they have received medical training and are generally licensed. When you decide on, or when you're talking with the midwife, make sure you understand their credentials. Is it a general midwife without medical training, or is it a certified nurse midwife and that they've completed nursing school at some point, and also midwifery school? Because those categories are important, because when you start looking at, I know people always say, lawyers are always worried about money, you're always worried about liability, but I am concerned about liability. In medical malpractice and birth injury, my practice is based off of liability, which is the negligence of somebody else usually. And so I tell people that when you're dealing with a doula, I'm pretty sure about 99% of the doulas you're going to come across will not be licensed and will not have any private insurance for an actual procedure. That's not what they do. And But some of the midwives, if they are part of a practice group, a lot of the times they will be licensed and insured under either the practice group or on their own. But make sure you have that, because if something happens under this person's watch and there's no liability insurance and the baby's injured, the mother's injured, there's no recourse really, because there's no insurance, there's no one to really go after. And quite often with doulas, what I've seen with how doulas are used, if a person's having a home birth or at a birthing center, the doula will just come in and not really manage the care, but just manage mom's emotions and feelings and make sure she's under control. And there's sometimes a nurse involved that's taking care of the medical aspect of it. And if that's the case, then it's great. But I always suggest to people, if you can, utilize the people who are licensed and trained to do this, and that's your certified nurse midwives or your RNs.
So, forgive me, I just wanted to clarify. So I actually get clarification on something. So the midwives, there is some regulation over them because they are nurses.
With your certified registered nurse midwives, usually they are nurses first, and then they become midwives. There are some midwives who, I guess, were kind of grandfathered in, never went to nursing school, but have just done it for so long that they're still considered midwives, but they haven't had the medical training to be considered certified.
And so do they have, diplomas or certificates, just as we do with our bar certifications or admissions, if you will? I mean, how does one verify that if I'm an expectant mom? How do you know?
Honestly, if they're in a part of a practice group, then you'll know if somebody has the medical credentials, let's put it that way. Because, I mean, if I can be a little kind of candid here, we do know that there are, pop-up places where somebody can go and take a class, maybe it's a few days, a weekend, whatever it is, and receive a certification to do whatever they say they're going to do. And that certification alone may just be enough to say, hey, I'm a certified whatever, but you're not medically backed or, medically licensed to do whatever you say you're going to do. But so look at them if you can. But I mean, you don't want to be in the office with your midwife and you're like looking all over to see, who issued the certification. But I mean, sometimes you have to, if you see it's, so-and-so's nursing school, then you can, open that dialogue. If it's something that you've never heard of, don't be afraid to ask questions. And that's another thing too about self-advocacy. Don't be afraid to ask questions when you see some of this stuff. Hey, I see you've been a nurse now or a midwife now for X amount of years. How was nursing school? How was midwifery school? And just let the person tell you what was going on. So that way you want to feel comfortable and confident in your decision to use whatever resource you're going to use. So feel free to ask them, how did you get into be a doula? What made you decide to do that? And did you have to go to school for that? Just sometimes random questions will get you kind of in the door for a dialogue to see if this is a good fit for you.
So, and thank you for that. In your, vast experience, I mean, what are, some of the horror stories? What are some of the tragic stories that you've seen regarding traumatic birth injuries? Does age play a role? Does stress play a role? Does all of it play a role?
All the above. And the first time I heard this term, I clutched my imaginary pearls, because I think at the time I was 36 or 37, but there's a term in the medical realm is geriatric pregnancy. And, we think of geriatrics are, our grandmas, our great grandmas, somebody who's 80, 90 years old. But a geriatric pregnancy, the magic number for old in maternity world is 35. And, that clutch those imaginary pearls.
I know.
It sounds like, wait a minute, hold on. I'm not old, but it's that's the way the medical field, I mean, they're trying to get rid of the term geriatric now, and we're focusing on advanced maternal age to make it more body positive, I guess. But I mean, we're still in that same realm, because you don't think of 35 as being old or elderly, but I mean, in the terms of giving birth, most in the history of the world, most women have given birth as in their teens. And so, you know, by the time you're 35, you are in fact advanced age. So, but that can play a problem. So what I suggest, and the women I've talked to, is to know your body going in. Know what your BMI is. It sounds weird that, you know, well, I feel fine, I feel healthy, but know your BMI, know what your weight is, and make sure you are in a good space for that, because you don't know what could happen. Many women gain weight during pregnancy. They develop swelling, they develop all kind of issues, and a lot of that is weight management. If you can get your weight under control pre-pregnancy, even better. If you can't, and you found out you're pregnant while you already are having weight problems, make sure you either maintain or you can do exercises to lose. Now, nobody's saying, you know, go and start running marathons if you never ran a marathon before, but there's nothing wrong with walking 30 minutes a day, 45 minutes every other day, you know, getting some light 3-pound, you know, barbell dumbbells, and, you know, doing some stuff just to try to keep your body going, get your body motivated, because with weight being an issue for mothers, preeclampsia can also be an issue. And preeclampsia unchecked could cause prematurity in babies. It can hasten the need to, well, the baby doesn't fully develop kidneys and livers. Even their lungs may not fully develop when a mom's preeclampsia, because the baby's not getting enough blood pumping to him or her through the placenta. So preeclampsia can be an issue. So I would tell people, make sure you monitor your work with your cardiologist to get off of those pills if you can, because high blood pressure can lead to gestational, not gestational, but I'm sorry, but with preeclampsia, if mom's heart rate is off and kind of wonky, baby's heart rate is off. So whatever you're doing as mom, baby's going to feel that impact as well. So just kind of keep that in mind. Diabetes. I have a few women who've been, one has been a type 1 diabetic since she was like 5 or 6 years old. And she's experienced her first pregnancy. There were complications, and we're just investigating it now. So I'm not certain if the complications were due to her being a type 1 diabetic, but that's also something to consider. But because she's in a category of, she's going to be considered high risk as well. Not just because of, high risk is not just due to age, but it can also be due to certain circumstances, like her having type 1 diabetes. She's going to see a maternal fetal specialist, also known as a perinatologist. So a perinatologist is someone who deals with high risk pregnancies. And as a type 1 diabetic, she would go see this person and just make sure her diabetes is under control so that there's no complications for the baby. And they'll monitor both throughout to make sure everybody's okay. But as a type 2 diabetic, that's one who generally gets diagnosed as an adult. If you're insulin dependent, you're high risk now. You have to make sure you're staying in contact with your perinatologist to make sure you're under control, your insulin levels are under control, because if yours is not, you're going to start affecting the baby. So that's another thing to consider. If you're not insulin dependent and if it's diet and exercise, you got to stay on. You got to stay on your diet and exercise. It has to be on point perfectly, because what happens to you happens to baby. So I would tell people, it's not just you anymore. Your body becomes a vessel at that point to take care of this other being or other beings if you have multiple babies.
There's so much. Even I'm not a mom, but if I were a mom, it just seems like there's so much, that we have to know, to research about our bodies, about our babies, about care and so forth. It can really feel a bit overwhelming. So what I think I'd like to do is to break up our conversation into the different phases of, a pregnancy. So let's talk about, and you've touched on a few points, but what are the things that I, as an expectant mom, should consider before I get pregnant? What are some of the conversations I need to be having?
Well, I would tell women, if you, before you get pregnant, start researching your OBGYN. Get comfortable with that person. If this is somebody you've had for years and you enjoy them and y'all can communicate and it's great, perfect. Stick with that person. But make an appointment with them if you can for a sit down conversation. Discuss with them what you're trying to do, your goals. You want to get pregnant. How soon do you anticipate becoming pregnant? Do you want a more holistic or natural childbirthing experience? Do you want to be in the hospital with nurses and equipment and all that stuff? Talk with this person beforehand if you have that relationship with your doctor. If you do not have that relationship with your specific OBGYN, or if you don't have a regular OBGYN, if you're going to find a clinic that you're comfortable with, that's close to you, that you can have easy access to, because that's another problem. I think that's another big issue with why Black maternal health is the way it is, because a lot of Black people live in areas where they're pretty much either medical deserts, is what we call them, where there are not as many hospitals. And of the hospitals that are there, not every hospital has a labor and delivery unit. So many hospitals will have a surgery floor and like emergency, but anything like any specialties, they don't really have a lot of them. And so I've heard of women, especially where I'm from in Atlanta, but in South Georgia, there are women who are driving 2 hours, 2.5 hours, 3 hours to medical appointments because there's nobody near them. There's no hospitals. There are no OBGYNs. And there are actually some women who have crossed into Florida and Alabama or South Carolina, depending on where they are, in order to get access to an OB. So if it's important to start by finding you a good OB, finding you a good clinic, somewhere you feel comfortable, you feel safe, and that you can have those dialogues about what your goals are. And then once you get to that point, now you can start. Your doctor will talk to you about same things we talked about: your diet, your exercising, your weight, that kind of thing, and your age. And you can decide whether or not you're high risk, or if you need to see anything, need to go and do anything special, or if you're fine with just your OB. But that, I would say that's step one. When you first decide, hey, I think I want kids, make that appointment, sit down, and start there.
I have a question as to that, because I've, of late, over the last probably 5 years or so, there's just been like an explosion of these urgent care clinics. They're popping up here, there, and everywhere. There is a significant difference between an urgent care clinic and actually, a place that has the equipment, the facilities for labor and delivery, right? Could you just speak briefly to that? Because I'm seeing them everywhere, and I just want to make sure that the audience, understands that that's not what you're talking about.
Right. So yeah, those urgent care clinics are usually there for emergencies. You got a wound that's open, or you got splinter or something or you think you got a bad cough and you want to get it checked out. Those are the things that you want to use that urgent care clinic for, and they don't have equipment for monitoring either pregnancies or helping with labor and delivery. So those are separate and distinct categories. So like I've gone to there if I scratched my eyelid, I scratched my eye and I went to urgent care. That's what that is there for. That is not there for your routine ultrasounds or anything like that. Even though they may have some of that equipment there, if it's not an emergency situation, that's what the emergency room is for. And in some situations too, where people don't have access to either a hospital or clinic, and it's not like a clinic with like urgent care, it's like a birthing clinic or it's usually like a division of the hospital. So the hospital has like a separate, like a mini hospital a little ways from the main hospital, so that way people have more access to it. Also, a place like Planned Parenthood has equipment there. If you need like an emergency ultrasound or something like that, and you wanted to talk to someone, they can have someone talk to you and just make sure hey, I woke up this morning with my baby. I don't feel him or her moving, and I can't get to the emergency room. They may be able to check for you and say, hey, we just did the ultrasound real quick, and everything looks okay, or it looks okay enough for you to make an appointment with your your OB/GYN and see if you can get in there, or make an emergency appointment, or either just go by your OB/GYN's office if you suspect that, something's going on, and, you can't wait for your regular scheduled appointment. So there's a big difference between those two facilities. But once you know where you're going, the hospital system you're going in, even they generally have multiple locations. So if you're on vacation or you're visiting somebody else and you're with, so-and-so's medical group, they may have another place for you to go if an emergency arises.
We have a lot to cover, but I'd be remiss if I, at least at this stage, didn't ask you to speak on, what should you be asking your partner? You show me your medical history, I'll show you mine. Shouldn't we be having those conversations before the little one comes into the picture?
Really, I mean, yes, you really should. And also, tell me about your family. Anybody in your family got any issues going on? That one cousin y'all don't talk about. What's going on with him or her? I mean, you really need to, because there are some doctors who will suggest pre-pregnancy genetic screening for both mom and dad, just to find out, are there any conditions that possibly could come up? Is there any family history of sickle cell anemia? That's another problem with the Black community. Down syndrome, other genetic predispositions. So some will suggest getting genetic testing done before, to make sure you and your partner, there won't be any potential issues. There's no way to kind of guarantee that something won't come up in the future or something won't develop in those 40 weeks, but that will kind of get you in the mindset. A lot of people in the African American community are carriers of sickle cell, the sickle cell trait. And you can get with a partner who may be a carrier of the sickle cell trait, and you can have 5 kids and none of them will have it, or you can have 4 and 4 are carriers and one will actually have sickle cell. So it's something as not simple as that, but it's something as, on the forefront as sickle cell. You can test for that stuff before you do anything. And so that way you kind of have an idea or understanding of what you could potentially face going into a pregnancy. So talk to your partners, get tested if you can, and start there.
Okay, let's talk about first trimester. Let's say if you weren't, as diligent as you are telling us to be before pregnancy, hey, I'm pregnant now. What are some things at this stage that I should be looking at? What are the tests, if any, that I need to have first trimester?
Well, once you find out you're pregnant, start on your prenatal vitamins. Once again, I'm not a doctor. I'm just telling you from what I've seen people, because a lot of people aren't getting, with our diets and exercise diets nowadays, especially here, everybody's so on the go. Everybody's busy. We're not getting the nutrients that we need from all the sources that we need. So start with a good prenatal vitamin until you get your first doctor's appointment. Make that doctor's appointment ASAP. Talk to your doctor. The first thing they're probably going to do is, ask you about when was your last menstrual cycle. And they're also going to maybe do your first ultrasound to kind of get the size of where the baby is. And the kind of, I think they can go from there and let you know how far along you are in your pregnancy. In addition to that, they may do some blood work on you at your first appointment or one of your first few appointments to check for some of those genetic testing. Because the baby is so small at that time, you can't really see much going on detailed in the ultrasound, but you may be able to see, is the placenta developing? Is it attaching where it's supposed to? Is it doing this? Is it doing whatever it needs to do? And they can tell some of that general stuff at that point in time. But I think what the biggest thing at that point is finding out who you're going to be. If you don't have your regular OBGYN, finding an OBGYN, finding somewhere where you're going to give birth, or talking to your OBGYN about where him or her has privileges to deliver, and kind of getting that kind of thing in place.
Renee, is it too early at this stage to have like a healthcare advocate, with you, kind of seeing those blind spots and just being there with you, the appointment? Is it too early for that or no?
I would say it's never too early. I would go back it up to, if you're one of those planners. I'm a planner. I have to have everything planned out as much as possible. And if you have your advocate with you even before you're pregnant, or coming to you at every appointment, because think about it. When we start thinking, we get stuff going, we miss details, and it's better to have somebody that was that. Well, no, Elsa, you remember you told me the other night that you weren't feeling well. Did you tell your doctor about that? Because you told me that. And it's good sometimes to have somebody to remind you that there's other stuff going on, or other things that need to be addressed that you may not be thinking about. So having that advocate from the beginning is best, but making sure you have somebody with you. I've gone to some doctor's appointments with some of my friends while they were in their second, third trimester, just to see, everything's good. Number one, I'm nosy. So I've gone, but just to make sure that, things are right. Like when they'll do the fetal monitoring, some of the last doctor's appointments in the third trimester, and you can hear the baby's heartbeat. And so my friends are like, okay, that's good. You can hear it. It's steady. This is what you want to hear, that kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. So it's also good too, when the mom is a first time mom, or either she's just so nervous and stressed about the situation where she just can't she's not thinking about everything. And to be honest with you, it's hard to think about yourself, making sure you're okay, and thinking about this life inside of you as well. You want to make sure, my hands are swelling. I developed this cough. I want to make sure that I'm not getting the flu or coming down with anything else. So you want somebody that's there to take care of you and your baby. And that advocate can do both, because he or she is not the one that's, on the labor and delivery table. That's you. So they can be your eyes and ears when you can't be.
Oh, I think your video's still there, but I think we got the last bit of what you said. Now let's move into second trimester. So we mentioned, genetic testing possibly in the first trimester. Is it possible to have it done, or is it too late to have it done in the second trimester? Our parents, is there anything that the parents of the child can do?
Oh, well, yeah. You can do genetic testing from as early as like pre-pregnancy to, you can even do genetic testing once the baby's been born. So that is always an option, and you can always request that. It's usually done by blood work, so it's not really invasive of a procedure. So you can ask your doctor for genetic testing; they can get it done. Usually, what the results are, like I said, nothing is guaranteed. They can say, this chromosome may be a factor, this chromosome may be a factor, but until or unless something actually happens, you really won't know whether or not there is a genetic component. But another thing a lot of women test for in their second trimester is Down syndrome is a big one. And they also do amniocentesis, where they take a very large needle and insert it through the mom, through the baby, and it's amniotic fluid. Take a little sample out just to make sure there's nothing going on with the fluid, and make sure there's a proper balance in with that. And also,
now there's got to be risk associated with that, because I'm seeing like this huge needle going into mom.
I've heard horror stories where they throw off the balance, or it has caused leaking of amniotic fluid. It could happen. There are, I guess, there are risks with anything really. Anytime you start to poke and prod, but that is something that any mom, you got to talk to your doctor about the pros and cons of it for you during that time frame. Another thing they start testing for a lot in second trimester is your glucose levels. They want to check to make sure you haven't developed gestational diabetes, because that is a big thing too. And gestational diabetes kind of mimics type 1 and type 2, where your insulin levels aren't controlled. If your insulin levels aren't controlled, that means the baby's not developing like the way he or she should. So it's important that you go get those tests done like you're supposed to get them done during the time frame you're supposed to get them done.
Okay. Now let's move on to third trimester. Time is ticking, and so what are the things that I, as an expecting mom, need to be thinking of? My birthing options. What are considerations?
Well, some at the beginning of their third trimester, or either sometime during the late second trimester, they've kind of worked out their birthing plan. They have, with their diet and their weight, the doctors have decided whether they're going to go for it. They're going to try to, because the goal is to go 40 weeks. The goal is to go term, and really the goal is to let the baby come naturally. So some women have gone 41 weeks. I mean, they'll go far if the baby's healthy, the baby's still moving around, and there's no issues with mom, there's no issues with baby. They'll pretty much go the distance on before they will decide to induce. If mom has a high BMI, or mom has developed gestational diabetes or preeclampsia, doctors may talk to mom about inducing or scheduling a C-section. So those are some things to consider, because a lot of women, like I said, they'll have these birthing plans where, I want to, we're going to give birth and we're going to have this, it's going to be a beautiful and magical moment, and they're going to be unicorns and stars, and we're going to do all this stuff. And I want to be at a birthing center, or I want to be in a pool in the house, or whatever it is. And, we all got a plan until life happens and you realize your plan is just whatever you wrote on a piece of paper, and that's all it's worth. Because there may be a situation where you're at a birthing center, something happens, and they got to throw you in the back of an ambulance and take you to the cross street to the hospital, or next door to the hospital, or whatever it is, or from home to the hospital. So have your birthing plan kind of in mind, but I always tell people, write it in pencil, because it can change. Like I said, the goal is to get you to 40 weeks and have the baby come naturally, but a lot of times it doesn't. Sometimes the body needs a little help, needs a little kickstart, and the doctors may decide to induce, or decide that, baby's big. Mama had gestational diabetes or type 2 or diabetes, and baby's big, and there ain't no way he or she's coming out. So we're going to schedule a C-section in order to get him or her out in a timely fashion. So that way everybody's kind of on board, and we're all on the same page. So it can have your birthing plan, but like I said, keep yourself flexible, because that birthing plan can very well change.
Can a midwife accompany the mother to the hospital, and can that work?
Yeah, actually, your midwife and your doula can accompany you to the hospital. Just as long as there's no restriction on who's allowed. And I think a big thing was during the beginning of COVID. At one point, they were only allowing mom and partner into the hospital. That's it. And I think, lately they've kind of relaxed in the last few months, letting more people in, usually one other person or maybe two other people. But you're allowed to bring your doula in. You're allowed to have if you have a separate midwife that's not a part of your hospitals or your OBGYN's practice, you can bring that person in, and that person will be your advocate. Your doula is going to be your advocate. Your midwife is going to be, because they're going to make sure they're looking out for your best interest and making sure you're comfortable and you're where you need to be during your stages of labor. I'm not sure if the doula will be the one that's actually going in and checking your cervix or anything like that, but some of the nurses will be there for that. And so whether you have your doula or your midwife or both, in addition to hospital staff, if you're at a medical facility, I say the more the merrier, because you all hands on deck. The more ears, the more eyes that are focusing on what's going on, I think you got a better shot of not having any problems, any potential problems at least.
That's interesting, because at some point, are there too many cooks in the kitchen, or is there at what point is enough? Or from, I guess, again, looking at it through your lens of that liability lens, you're in favor of having more eyes in the room.
Definitely.
Get more management.
And I'll tell you one of the cases that we had a few years ago. One of the nurses, I could tell she was upset. The baby was born with a birth injury, and the nurse was, in her deposition, was saying that, the mom, she had been laboring down all day, and, she was tired, she was worn out. I thought I was just trying to help her sleep. So what that nurse did was turned off the the volume on the fetal monitor. And so mom could rest for a while. But while that monitor, the sound was down or too low or off, the baby started having complications. And if the noise was on the monitor, it would pick that up, and everybody would have been able to kind of spring into action. But because it was so low, nobody heard it. Nobody heard the alarms going off. And so the baby ended up having suffering a birth injury because of that. The baby ended up having a hypoxic event and lost some oxygen during that time frame. But in my situation, had you had more advocates, you know, if I'm there, I'm going to be sitting there looking at that monitor. So you go on to sleep, mom, but I'm going to be right there watching the monitor just to check the baby's heart rate while you're resting to make sure he or she is okay while you're going through that. So I can say, I think with labor and delivery, you can never have too many cooks in the kitchen.
Yeah, and you can't just rely on your doctor because your doctor is out doing rounds and so forth. So they're not going to be like watching that equipment like, you know, like you would, like a hawk,
right?
You know, just to make sure that everything's beeping and buzzing, you know, normally.
Right.
What are again from your practice point? Are there some of the dangers or some dangers in relying on a completely holistic approach?
Yes and no. There are some dangers. The biggest thing that I've seen is that someone is at a facility or somewhere that is so far away from medical equipment or medical intervention that if something were to happen, by the time they get there, you run the risk of not only baby suffering an event, but also mom suffering an event. And I've heard of horror stories where by the time they got to the hospital, mom and baby both had passed away because mom is bled out, baby's lost oxygen as well, and you just can't. And in addition to that, like I said, with some of these birthing centers or some of these other facilities, there's no insurance, or you know, and I'm a lawyer. This is what I do. If somebody wrongs you, my goal is to get you made whole. And we do that through litigation. We do that through the court system. And we do that by suing. And I can't make you whole if the other person that's on the other side of the table has nothing. If it's a birthing center, or if it's a private doula and you're at their own facility and something happens, you know, I feel sorry for you guys, but there's really nothing I can do at that point.
Wow, that's a hard reality, but it's something that people need to hear and should really factor into their birthing plan, which ideally should happen way before they get to this point, and should probably invest in talking with you or someone that does what you do ahead of time, because you have such a wealth of knowledge, Renee, and you can really help people, with those blind spots that we inevitably have because we don't specialize in, birth injuries, and advocating for victims, that have, children with suffered birth injuries. So to that point, how would somebody get in contact with you?
Well, number one, I'm all over social media, but I'll give you. So we also have a website, bostonlawllc.com. Our law firm, again, is Boston Law Group. Our main number is 1-833-4-BABY-HELP. We have a local number here in the DMV of 301-850-4832. And before we break else, I want to talk real quick about a big issue where I don't want anybody to think, well, she's here, she's all about money, she's all about money. But one thing people need to consider is that an injured baby has needs for their lifetime. And these injured babies can still outlive their parents. You especially if we're geriatric parents, we can have your baby can outlive you, and you want your baby to be in the position. Some of these birth injuries, we have a life care planner who will evaluate the baby's needs today and kind of anticipate what he or she is going to need in the future for long haul. So, and they'll give them a life expectancy too. If it's 50, 60, 70 years, he or she's going to need things for the long haul. They may not be able to work ever. They may not be able to live independently ever. So I've seen life care plans, $50 million, $60, $75 million and on up. Not saying that every family that enters litigation is going to receive those types of funds, but that kind of is a number that will be needed, or close to it will be needed, or you can kind of play around with a little bit. But that is what we're talking about when that's how serious this is when a baby's injured. He or she's going to need significant care for a significant period of time. And you have to be prepared to hold whomever that is responsible. So you can think it's all fun and games and, we can play it by ear, but the big thing is to prepare, plan. We have, once our babies are born and we resolve these cases, we actually talk to someone like you to put the parents into, because parents are going to need wills now, but you're going to need somebody to oversee some of the funds. If something happened to the parents, who's going to take over? Who's going to make sure, if this is the only child, who's going to make sure that he or she is protected if something happens to the parents? So we need different people to kind of help facilitate this, so that way the baby's protected for the long haul, for his or her life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And in many of those conversations that I have with young families, new families, usually involve, we're talking trust. We're talking about naming, guardians in the event that something does happen to mom and or, the other parent. And, we need to plan ahead. So that's why at the outset, I said that my practice, it's a holistic practice. So I engage with professionals like you. It's not just the people on the finance side, but we're looking at the whole person, which involves, when we're talking about women, it's their health. And for women who choose, to have pregnancies, we're thinking about the baby. Now we've got this other being that we've got to care for, and planning for all the what ifs. And that's why having you and others, as part of a team, it's got to be a collaborative effort. And that's one of the things that I stress. And I hope that the audience really gets that message. You can't do it alone. And in fact, you shouldn't do it alone. You have resources. And one of the things I aim to do on this show is to highlight professionals in our area that can be that trusted resource. Renee and her firm, this is what they do. Talk to them early on in the process. As Renee said, it's never too early to have an advocate. Mm-hmm. And Renee, there's never too many cooks in the kitchen.
Never.
Wonderful. Renee, are there any resources that maybe on your website or anything that you can point people to? I know you have a wealth of information on social media.
Mm-hmm. So in addition to our website, I'm going to give you my my Instagram and TikTok. It's Renee, RENEE _MD lawyer. Now that MD stands for Maryland, not medical doctor. Renee _MD lawyer. We post things. If I don't have it on my page, Marcus has it on his page, but we post things and resources all the time, just helpful tidbits a lot of the times, and educational resources. If you are pregnant or thinking about getting pregnant and you don't have insurance, I would say start with your local, either your city or your county government. They may have a health department or a pregnancy system. That way they'll work with you on getting insurance, or make sure you have it coverage for you and the baby. Also, if diet and exercise is a problem, they have programs to make sure mom gets nutritious foods or proper nutritious foods. So that way, she's feeding this baby. So make sure she has access to these things. So like I said, we have some on our website. You can find more on our social media. But also, if you want to reach out and say, Renee, hey, I'm in such and such. What do you have? I also have moms that I've worked with all over the United States, and they are a wealth of knowledge too. And I'll pick up the phone and call them and say, hey, I got a mom that's in your area. She needs to know, what can she do as far as, either medical equipment or finding out more information about food benefits, or if there's any kind of care services, home health aid or something like that. What can we do? And we can provide that information. But also too, I want to remind you and your viewers that even though once the baby's born, that's usually the end of the situation. But with Black maternal issues, they can occur postnatally as well. So, and
Mm,
that's usually up to a year after the baby's born. So, moms have been known to suffer from preeclampsia after
mm,
the baby's born, and they've got, you know, and if that's not treated, if they're not going to the doctors, if they're not following up after that, you know, because now she's taking care of this baby and she's not really taking care of herself as much. And there have been a lot of issues where postnatally, women have suffered from strokes and heart attacks and have developed serious heart diseases because of preeclampsia that has gone unchecked after she's given birth. So it's pre-pregnancy, it's post-pregnancy, it's kind of all in between. So there's a lot of information out there. There's a lot that people need to know before getting pregnant. And if you are already pregnant, there's a lot you need to know during your pregnancy to make sure you have the best outcome for not only your baby, but also for you, because you know, nobody wants this baby out here without his mama. So we need you here, mom. So, you know, take care of yourself in addition to the kids.
Renee, thank you so much. You've just been, a wealth, and I'm dating myself if I say an encyclopedia of information.
Oh, my pearls.
No, but you're not only a friend, a respected member of the bar, but you are just such an asset to our community. And thank you so much for really speaking to us about the things that really are impacting our community. And we really need to be sounding the alarms more than they're being done, because women are dying, women are, suffering, and their babies are suffering as well. So thank you for everything that you and your law firm do and are continuing to do to empower women, move us, from just stressed and overwhelmed to empowered, which is the mission of my estate planning firm. So thank you so much.
And thank you very much for having me, Elsa. I greatly appreciate what you do, and not only with the podcast, but what you do providing this information to our community as well.
Absolutely wonderful, Renee. Thank you, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks. Bye-bye.
Everyone, wasn't Renee amazing? And such, as I said, such an asset to our community. This is the kind of the caliber of experts that I enjoy bringing to you on the podcast. So as a reminder, this and all future episodes are going to be available on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. I am Elsa W. Smith, your Maryland estate planning and probate attorney, empowering women through estate planning. Make it a wonderful day. Take care.